Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. When I worked at City Hall some 45 years ago, there was a room in the basement set aside for veterans to meet when there was an occasion for them to do so. Now there's the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs, and retired Brigadier General Dr. Loree Sutton is the commissioner, and I'm delighted to say she's my guest today.
Thank you so much, Ronnie.
I've heard that you have now, in the process of revising or changing this mayor's office into a larger, I think more ambitious program called a department.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ronnie. It is very exciting. Over this last year, there's been this convergence of leadership. The mayor, the speaker, Chairman Eric Eldridge of the Committee on Veterans, and of course, our advocates here in New York City. And the time has come now for a new Department of Veteran Services. The mayor signed it into law on the Intrepid back in December, and now we're in the transitional planning phases to be able to open our doors later this year.
So how is it going to be different? What do you see it as?
Well, we're already building the capacity so that we will, for the first time ever, we'll have city-wide presence. We're training up our outreach specialists so they'll be able to be in each of the boroughs, and so that veterans and their families will much more easily be able to access our services, as well as we'll be able to double down on our three top-tier strategic priorities. One you probably heard a little bit about: ending veteran homelessness. The mayor joined his peers across the country in the White House and pledged to end chronic veteran homelessness this last year. The federal government certified that we did so at the end of December, and now we're taking that to the next level to achieve functional zero and then sustaining that progress.
And is there federal money that goes into that?
There is. There's partnerships at all levels: federal, state, city, as well as our service providers and community organizations.
Different levels of kind of housing for veterans according to their needs. So
absolutely,
a family is here and a single person there, and
absolutely. And one of the things we were able to build into our team is veteran peer coordinators. There were lots of case managers and housing specialists and social workers, all kinds of folks working on this campaign. But we knew that particularly with veterans, that peer-to-peer bond of trust really is so important. It's important to prevent homelessness, and it's also important to help our veterans get their lives back on track. So that's our first line of action, and we're very excited about that because, of course, what we learn with veterans and the system, the processes, the partnerships, the policies that we establish for veterans, get those up and working well, then we can scale to really help the broader issues with homelessness, the larger population here in New York City. So we're very excited about that. Our second line of action, we're so pleased to partner with the First Lady. Shirlane McCray has made mental health her signature issue. So in December, she and the mayor, with their children, Dante and Kiara, it's a family issue, mental health is. And certainly the mayor and the First Lady have been so courageous and so frank about talking just about the generations, from the war wounds that the mayor's father brought back to the more recent struggles that not just our first family, but so many families in New York City face. So Thrive NYC is just, it's the most comprehensive, community-based, systematic roadmap for taking the greatest city in the world and really just weaving mental health into our conversations. Really working hard to build up community resilience. On the veterans side, we're excited because we're going to be able to further expand our outreach. We've developed a fund of holistic services, so we'll be able to provide holistic services like acupuncture and equine therapy, service dog, the kinds of things that can be provided in non-clinical settings that help veterans and their families feel normal again. And we're also going to be, of course, working on the citywide public education campaign to really help folks, get over the fear, get over the stigma, recognize that mental health shouldn't be any bigger deal than if you break an ankle, you go get the help that you need. And it starts with peer-to-peer interventions at the community level. The foundation built on culture and the arts to be able to engage at that level, peer-to-peer intervention, those holistic services, and of course, when you need clinical care, that's there as well.
So you're taking advantage also of existing organizations, but bringing them in.
Absolutely.
And
so
this is your specialty.
It is.
You're a doctor, a psychiatrist, right?
It doesn't get any better than this. You know, to have the blessing of serving nearly 30 years in uniform,
Yeah.
and now to have this opportunity in this, the greatest city in the world, doesn't get any better than this, Ronnie.
And this is a great place for veterans, isn't it?
It is.
It's not isolated. They don't get lost there.
Well, and you know, that's an exciting element. That leads to the third line of action, which is to connect our veterans and their loved ones with the city's employment resources, services, care. You know, we're an $80 billion a year enterprise. The city is the largest employer of veterans, but we want to go beyond that. And we're linking up with folks like CUNY, the leaders, Chancellor Milliken and President Jeremy Travis at John Jay, and we're linking up to figure out how can we reach across all of the academic institutions here in New York City and make New York City a magnet city to draw new veterans and their families here and, you know, take a page out of the immigration history of New York. Generations, you know, folks have brought their dreams, their hard work, and in this case, veterans are bringing their strengths. Really their strengths, Ronnie, and I'll say it again, veterans and their families are our city's leading natural renewable resource.
And what about the business community?
Absolutely.
I mean, we talk about mentoring programs. You know, that was Matilda Cuomo's thing and did so well, and we know that's such a good thing. And we've got all these corporations and everybody. That would be also, isn't it important?
Absolutely. And in fact, our Veterans Advisory Board, we've really revamped it over this last year. The mayor and the speaker have appointed new members and reappointed a few members to really maintain continuity. And the business community is absolutely part of those efforts so that we can make sure that whether a veteran or family member is interested in, you know, learning a little more about business, maybe going to one of the CUNY schools, or maybe has a great idea and wants to, you know, become an entrepreneur, a business owner. Those are absolutely part of our strategy going forward to make sure that everyone can pursue whatever dream it is that they have and bring those dreams here to New York City.
I told you that I did some work with veterans and with some faculty members from West Point, and it brought such a respect for me for people who are in the armed forces, and that I don't think has ever been generally appreciated. The training and the abilities that people develop in the Army, so that it really is such a challenge, and I think it's just wide open here. But I wanted to ask you another question. In a terrible way, veterans of the recent wars and coming back here have had massive instruments of destruction, and so their wounds are even worse, right, than other wars we've had.
Well, here's the situation, Ronnie, is that because of the advances that we've made in medical care and resuscitation and providing intensive care in the air, I mean, it's been just amazing, the advances. We've been able to save the lives of young men and women in uniform that we never would have been able to
That's
save.
always been the history, hasn't it, of medicine? That a war always brings you up to the next threshold.
You know, none of us would wish for war, particularly
Yeah.
those of us who are in uniform, but that has been the history, that innovations born of war come back to not only benefit our veterans and service members and their families, but the entire country and the entire world. In this set of conflicts, because of the complexity of these wounds, physical, spiritual, emotional, psychological, burns, internal injuries, what we are now learning and advancing through the experiences of our veterans and their families is the criticality of integrative health. You know, to be able to bring everything together.
And that brings in all, as you said,
mind, body, and spirit.
acupuncture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's an exciting time because our veterans and our service members, their families, they don't care about the old turf battles. They don't care about, you know, the old sort of Cartesian mind-body split in my field, mental health. You know, you'd have sort of the real versus the Memorex line. You know, we'll do all of the investigation, and if we don't find anything, then you go see the wizard.
Yeah.
That's just.
And then you used to have the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I don't think they work together ever. I don't know. I may be wrong, but.
Well, and now they do.
So that's what we're saying is.
Yes, we're all in this together. And I will tell you, let me just give a special shout out to the Vietnam generation. The men and women who served in Vietnam who were not treated well. And in fact, that's how the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs was established. Mayor Koch, himself a veteran, he set it up when Vietnam veterans were pounding on the doors of City Hall, rightly demanding better treatment. And then, you know, veterans have had this dream of establishing a Department of Veteran Services ever since, which is part of what makes this so exciting. But I think that it's important to recognize that the gains that this generation of Vietnam veterans have made, it's truly historic. They've helped us mature as a nation to recognize that we can't blame the warrior. If we have disagreements with a war, take it to the politicians. And so our Vietnam veterans, they're the ones who have welcomed our veterans back. They have manned the memorial services with the Patriot Guard, guarded the sanctity, and they have absolutely built the foundation on which we now are privileged to grow.
It's, you know, the Vietnam War, with the public reaction to it, I don't remember any of the public officials specifically talking about our armed forces. And now you don't hear any political speaker not refer to it. So it is that concern. It's such an incredible difference.
Absolutely.
It's a very interesting phenomenon. And they have the support of everybody.
Exactly.
Don't dare say that you're going to ignore a veteran. Right?
Well, that's exactly it, Ronnie. And here in New York City, we're so blessed to have, you know, the mayor and his wife, all of their parents were involved in service in World War II. So they know so much more closely than most both the strengths as well as the struggles of military families, and they're committed. And that's why
and the aftermath.
Exactly.
We never talked about post-traumatic stress after Vietnam, did we?
No. I mean, you know, years later, the struggles of our Vietnam veterans led to the diagnosis in my own field in psychiatry, and now, of course, we've learned so much more. But, you know, we've always had post-traumatic stress with war.
World War I, we had. Everybody grew up with somebody.
Shell shock in World War II, battle fatigue. In the Civil War, it was called soldier's heart. So there have been different names over the years, but certainly in this set of conflicts since 9/11, the degree of exposure in terms of days of combat experienced, that's been a real difference for this generation. You know, if you go back to World War I forward, average days of combat, which we know is the number one factor that determines really post-combat sequelae, you know, range from 100 days to, with Vietnam, 300 days or so. Most of our Vietnam veterans were one-term draftees. But when it comes to the 32-year-old today who was 18, high school senior at 9/11, 500 days, 1,000, 1,500 days of more of continuous successive deployments and the load that places on families. So this is where it's so incredibly important for us to intervene at the community level. We can't wait until the hospital and clinic. That's not where hope and healing and you know starts. It starts at the community level. It starts at the kitchen table. Conversations like this, Ronnie, just to help folks understand, yes, there are struggles, but there are also enormous strengths. And that's the opportunity here in New York City for our veterans and their families.
You've always been interested, I think, in resiliency.
Yes.
Tell me about it. Define it.
You know,
what is it? The ability of some people to survive?
You know, as a species, we are wired for resilience. And what that means is that as human beings, we can endure the most incredible adversity, and yet find a way through social support, through advances in our ability to diagnose, to treat, to intervene early, through our understanding of trauma. This whole field of trauma care has really only come up during the last few, I can remember when I started my residency and PTSD had just been placed as a diagnosis in the diagnostic manual. People were still
where
asking.
were we in the world affairs at that time?
So 1981, President Reagan had just come into office. There was this strange disease that people didn't really understand then. Of course, it evolved into our current understanding of AIDS. And so I was training in San Francisco, and there were all of these different, really
mysterious, terrible things happening.
well,
right?
yes, and the trauma that people had experienced not only from Vietnam but from Lebanon and different aspects of our military experience, as well as what was happening in society. And I think you add that with the progress and advances that women have made, for example, and it's been this 30-year trajectory has just been absolutely gripping in its historic import and impact. And that's where I tell you, Ronnie, it's such a privilege to be with you here today.
Oh, please.
Because we're all in this together, but we have to stand on the shoulders of giants in all of these domains to move things forward.
So resiliency then is the ability to survive terrible things. Is that the word?
Well, okay. So the resilience really becomes the human capacity for not only enduring and surviving just the most incredibly adverse experiences, but also to be able to become stronger,
to thrive after it as a result.
There's a whole body of research now on what they call post-traumatic growth. And this is the capacity that any of us have, despite the adversity, to come through an experience and all of a sudden realize, what's really important. The relationships. Maybe it's a deepening of faith, a strengthening of empathy, a renewed sense of purpose, of service. That's really what our veterans are bringing back to our society. And, we're here in New York City just with open arms for our veterans and their families.
You bring up it very personal with me. My first husband died very young. I was a housewife. He did everything. I mean, he didn't do everything. I'm misguiding if I say that. But he hung the pictures, he did the bills, he did this and everything. Suddenly there I was, the head of a household. And I'll never forget the moment that I hung the first picture on the wall. And that was my...
What a moment,
isn't
yes.
it such a funny kind of thing? But it is a question of resiliency.
It is.
You come out of it stronger than ever, yeah.
Well, one example, I remember I was stationed at Fort Hood commanding the hospital there during the toughest part of the surge back in 2006 and 7. And there was a young soldier who had just come back from his second deployment. And I asked him how things were going, and he was proud of his service, but he said, ma'am, he says, coming back, I now know really what's important in life. And he said, the next time I'm at McDonald's and someone's complaining about their Coke not having enough ice, I'm going to tell them what life's really all about. Well,
that's it. Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
it. That's it.
Were you there when with the shooting of the enlisted men?
I was not. I was stationed in Washington, D.C. I founded and directed the Defense Centers of Excellence for Psychological Health and Traumatic Brain Injury, but that was certainly many of the people that I had served with and cared about and loved dearly were involved in that tragedy.
That's another kind of stress, isn't it? Shock. From these personal things that come so close to home when you're not in the services.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where it's important to understand. You hear a lot of people talking now about PTSD and associating it with veterans. And to be sure, combat produces its own complex form of trauma. But we have to understand there are people every day who are in traffic accidents, who are assaulted, who have been through workplace violence or radicalized terrorist extremist events. And so as a society, it's important for us to learn from our veterans and their families so that we can take that spirit of resilience forward and not succumb to fear.
So you're really predicting that the general population of this country is going to have better mental health in the future?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So interesting, isn't
And
it?
it starts at the community. We've focused on the clinical aspect. That's critical. But if we don't build out this community base of the pyramid, culture and arts and engagement at the community level, and here in New York City, of course, we have so much to offer. And then, of course, the next part up, peer-to-peer trained intervention. And the next part up is to be able to have community services in non-clinical settings. And what that all does, building out that bottom part of the pyramid, Ronnie, it restores the capacity for safe and trusting relationships, and it conveys the message, I'm not alone. So if I do need clinical help, it's no big deal. Of course I'm going to go get the help that's available and return to my community.
But how do we take that model and put it into some of these impoverished communities that are lying in such ruinous state?
Well, and that's where I would really encourage you and your listeners to check out Thrive NYC. It's a 120 page report, but it outlines how New York City is taking the lead. And by doing things like establishing a mental health corps of navigators who go out into the communities, establishing a mental health innovation lab so we can more quickly determine what works and for whom, developing culturally congruent and appropriate approaches so that we can really reach out and connect with the most vulnerable among us, recognizing things like, postpartum depression, things that people don't like to talk about, but they
So important.
they can really be so vitally important. Providing coaching for young families. I mean, it's just an incredible roadmap, and I just feel privileged to be able to represent the needs and strengths of veterans and their families within that roadmap.
How do we bring it into early child care and elementary schools and public, any school?
And that's exactly what this roadmap incorporates. There's not, in fact, I was just yesterday talking to Jill Bowen, who's just come on board. She's worked so strongly here in the private sector in New York City on healthcare transformation, and has just come into city government to work with Deputy Mayor Bury and leaders across city government and the First Lady. And she said, when I looked at this roadmap, she said, I kept turning the pages and they thought of this, they thought of that, they thought of this. It's really just
So how did you think of this,
exciting.
and who did you do it with?
Well, this actually, the First Lady, this was her focus a year ago, and when I heard that she was adopting a public health community-centered approach that focused on peer-to-peer interventions and community services, and were connected, of course, to the clinical community, I thought, this is what I've worked for my entire life. Of course, we're going to bring veterans and their families into this, and we're going to demonstrate in New York City what it really means to engage at community level, have difficult conversations, and connect folks to the resources that are all around them, starting with each other.
And the veterans groups are all brought into this and are partners, or
Absolutely.
as
So
they say, I don't like the expression stakeholders or something like that?
Exactly. So we're continuing to reach out and to get ideas. In fact, there was a group of 20 veterans, the Veterans Alliance here in New York City, that met all day Saturday this last weekend. They called me, they had a question on something, and we'll continue to work with the VAB, the advisory board, as well as all of the veteran service organizations to get their idea and their input as we go forward.
And what about all of the attention? There are different problems with
Yes.
men and women.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So we have whole different paths within this thing.
Well, it's true. The experience of being a woman in uniform can be one that's particularly isolating. And
Did
many
you find
of
it like
us,
that?
well, I learned more about being a woman in uniform after I retired from 30 years than I did before, because none of us in uniform, certainly during that 1981 through 2010, that 30-year period, we didn't want to do anything that would attract attention to us. So we just worked.
But you were aware.
Absolutely.
Problems.
Oh, absolutely. And became even more aware when I had the opportunity to participate in the Invisible War.
The film.
And to talk with and meet with and learn from hundreds of women and men who had experienced military sexual trauma and who had really suffered in silence. And of course, we can't forget the suffering of so many of our, LGBTQ community who now, with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, we have an obligation to get our arms around them as well, get their discharges
Do you go
changed.
retroactive?
Well, so when the policy was repealed, there was no blanket sort of repeal of all of the bad paper and all of that. So the good news is that for those that we can get our arms around and bring into legal services, it's
So their
really
families,
exciting.
Their partners will all be involved.
And there's been some great media coverage. Dave Phillips with the New York Times a couple of months ago did a great front page story on the particular needs of LGBT veterans and their families, and some of these in their 80s who are now getting their papers.
That makes you. That's great.
Yeah.
We've come to the end of this interview. So when are we going to hear formally and know about the new Department of Veteran Services?
Well, okay. Here's where we are right now. The mayor signed the bill in December. We're in the middle of transitional planning right now. And as soon as we have something to announce, Ronnie, I'll give you a holler.
Okay, and you'll come back.
It's a deal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Loree Sutton.
Thank you.
If there are any people you'd like to hear or topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.